Now, you have had some time to go over and read Newsom's newest order banning fracking, and you've had some time to gather your thoughts on that. Can you express your initial reaction to reading up on it?
Well, it's a very positive development, and I'm sorry it didn't come out yesterday on Earth Day.
Yeah.
You had to wait a day until today to get it done. I the main thing he does is direct the CalGEM, the California Department of ooh, I forget exactly what it stands for, but geological and energy management to develop regulations and pass them in order to be able to start not issuing permits for fracking starting in 2024. That's the main thing. So it's not going to have immediate impact. It's not itself a fracking ban, and there's going to be this regulatory process. What they're going to have to do is, I think, probably adopt regulations through a kind of a formal regulatory process where there's public comment and so on. And then, once those regulations are in place, I kind of expect them to get sued by the Western States Petroleum Association or something like that. But I believe that the statute authorizing CalGEM was changed in the last year or two to allow them to take into account health impacts of their regulations, and that may be the hook they can use to put through that ban, because fracking does have negative impacts on health. Not only are there emissions from the into the air, but a lot of times these fracking fluids get into the water, especially the groundwater. So that part is really good. He also directed them to try to figure out a way to phase out oil and gas production in California by, I believe, 2045. And that makes sense because there is already an executive order in place um, ordering that California will be carbon neutral by 2045. And so it only makes sense if we're not if we're not burning fossil fuels. That's the main thing we need to do to fight climate change, is not burn fossil fuels like coal, oil, and gas. If we're not burning fossil fuels, then we probably shouldn't be producing them either here. There's no need to produce them. So that's my initial reaction.
And then, there are a lot of supporters who, they mostly talk about the jobs that'll be lost due to this. What would your response be to that?
Well, it's very much like the loss of coal jobs. There was actually an article out today, report by, I think, a big mining union back in West Virginia that kind of supported retraining for their people, because they're finally acknowledging that the coal jobs aren't going to come back. Trump had this kind of rhetorical position. He didn't have any way to actually do it, but because it's uneconomical. But he had this rhetorical position that he was going to bring coal back. Well, he can't do that, and those jobs really are going to vanish. I mean, we're pretty well onto the process of phasing out coal production, or at least the use of coal in this country. So the same thing is going to happen to oil and gas jobs, and it is essential that those workers get retrained. It's essential, just like the coal workers, that they're not just left high and dry. We killed your jobs. You don't have any other skills. Too bad. You're going to go on to what's left of welfare or whatever. That's really unfair to them. So an important part of this process here and everywhere is finding what the advocates call a just transition, which means, among other things, the workers need to get retrained so that they can have high-paying, good jobs with a skill set that they can reasonably acquire. So that may be in renewable energy. There's probably a lot of transferable skill between doing oil production and putting up renewable energy, facilities of one sort or another. But that's really important. But I think just as with coal, these jobs are going away, and it makes a lot more sense to plan for that just transition than it does to kind of deny that they're going away.
Actually really interesting. I've spoken to the other side quite a few times, and it's never brought up about a just transition. It's just this is the end for jobs. That's it. There's no retraining or anything. I find it fascinating you bring that up. Looking down the line in a number of years, what will be the real impacts on the environment, moving forward and making California more green, as I'll put it.
Well, the transition to uh, renewables will be pretty much positive for the environment. There are some aspects of it, uh, like building really large solar facilities out in the middle of the desert, for example, that do have pretty strong environmental impacts, and those have to be looked at. But other than that, I mean, the main thing is that if we're phasing out oil and gas production, we get the climate change benefits of that, which are felt by everybody in the world. Climate change, when you put a greenhouse gas into the air here in California, it disperses and a little bit affects everybody in the whole world. That's of course a positive thing. But also we get, by closing down some of these oil production facilities, we get co-benefits of reducing the pollution. Those places pollute a lot. They have kind of normal criteria air pollution, like particulates and NOx, and they leak methane. So the people who live right around them are going to get a benefit from closing those facilities, beyond the climate change benefit everybody in the world will get. One of the main talking points for the people fighting for these bans has been a 2,500-foot setback. They, based on this health issue, and these facilities are mostly in disadvantaged communities. I believe there's one oil well in the Beverly Hills High School parking lot, but that's sort of not the usual thing. Normally it's out in the middle of Linwood or something like that, where the people living there are not rich, and they've never really had a say in, are we going to let this thing go into your neighborhood? So they'll get a lot of benefit. The people living near those oil facilities, they'll get a lot of benefit from discontinuing the production there.
Dean, is there anything else that you would like to add in this interview?
Well, actually, two things. Yeah, this fits in really well. I was on I listened to the meeting of the Plum Committee in Los Angeles. That's the Planning and Land Use Management Committee. This week was considering a proposal to ban oil production in Los Angeles, kind of across the board. And it's in a somewhat similar position here. What they're doing is they're asking the city attorney and there's a little kind of understaffed Bureau of Oil Management or whatever it's called. But there are a couple oil administrators for the oil districts in the city of Los Angeles. They're asking them to come up with a plan to phase out oil and gas production in the city, which they can do under like a completely different authority legally. It's the land use authority. It's essentially zoning, is that legal authority. They can say you're not allowed to run a whorehouse in this district. They can also say you're not allowed to produce oil and gas in this district. It's a use, and so they don't have to permit those uses, but if they phase them out, they do have to provide for a reasonable amortization period. People who've invested in that production deserve to have a chance to recoup their investment to a certain degree. So that's the issue they're seeing, and of course that'll be an issue if the state does it too. If you fail to do this, if you fail to allow people to recoup their investment enough, like the oil companies, then you're liable for a taking under the Amendment of the United States Constitution. But the way you avoid that is by having a reasonable phase out period.